We just announced the 100% correct tier rankings in the American League, and now we move on to the National League. I would say the teams are getting ready for opening day, but there's a voice in the distance to remind you opening day technically took place in South Korea, but all the other teams haven't played yet, and we need to talk about them. So it's time to put the National League teams in tier rankings.
Totally sports. Ask. Major League.
We start in the NL East, and we start with the defending NL East champions in the Atlanta Braves. The Braves had their best regular season record since 1998 and had one of the greatest offensive teams of all time. Their 307 home runs tied the 2019 Twins for the most of all time. They had 7 players with an OPS over 800, leading to the greatest team slugging percentage of all time at .501. Ronald Acuna Jr. won the MVP, while Matt Olson and Austin Riley finished in the top 10. But in the NLDS, they ran into the kryptonite the last 2 years, known as the Phillies, and they lost in 4 games for the second straight year. Despite this, the Braves are basically returning the same team after extending much of their top talent for a combined price of $7. Their biggest offensive loss is Eddie Rosario, but they replaced him with Jared Kelenic, who's looking for a bounce-back year after he broke his foot kicking a water cooler. They also lost Vaughn Grisham, who they traded for Chris Sale, and if Sale were to return anywhere close to his old form, then that would make them almost unfair. They gave up plenty for Aaron Bummer, but the bullpen was the weak area that Bummer will add a lot to. Fangraphs projects the Braves had the best record in the league at 98-64, and it would be surprising to not see them in this range. And they are very obviously World Series contenders. Up next is the Miami Marlins. The Marlins had their first playoff appearance in 2023 in a full season since they won the World Series in 2003, and they have yet to ever win the division, though they are somehow tied with the Braves for the most World Series in the division since their inception. And in typical Marlins fashion, they did nothing to capitalize on their momentum. The biggest news from Miami was GM Kim Ng stepping down from her position, something that looks like it could be a mistake, and a replacement, Peter Bendix, didn't do much to add to the team. They finished last in the NL in runs last year and bottom 5 in OPS. They lost their biggest power source in Jorge Soler and a few more in Yuli Gurriel, Garrett Hampson, and Joey Wendell. Their biggest addition is Tim Anderson, who can only go up after the worst year of his career. They are simply hoping a full season from Jake Burger, Josh Bell, and Jazz Chisholm will boost the lackluster offense. What led them last year was their pitching. They finished only behind the Braves in the NL in team strikeouts, but they unfortunately are going to miss Sandy Alcantara, who is receiving Tommy John surgery. He wasn't near as good as his Cy Young year last year, but he was the workhorse on a young staff. The Marlins are projected to go 81-81, but for some reason it's easy to see them being much worse. Their pitching should still be great as the young electric staff got another year of experience, but it's hard to see their offense being much better, and it's also hard to see them going 33-14 in one-run games again. I don't want to call them mid, so I'll put them in a special tier called fish. Up next is the New York Mets. After setting a record for payroll in 2023, they set a record for the worst return on investment after finishing 12 games under 500. The positive the Mets have going into the season is they are returning much of their team, which actually may not be a positive, but they picked up a number of under-the-radar players, adding Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, and Adrian Hauser to the rotation, and Jorge Lopez and Fujinami to the bullpen, where the biggest positive of the season comes from the return of Edwin Diaz, and Harrison Bader will join Brandon Nimmo and Starling Marte in the outfield. But just like last year in March, the Mets received bad news when it was announced that Kodai Senga, who ended up being their ace, will start the year on the IL with a strained shoulder, meaning their opening day starter will be Jose Quintana. Not a very exciting announcement. The Mets feel like the Marlins in the fact that it's hard to exactly tell where they'll end up. They didn't have any huge signings, but they should get a full year from Edwin Diaz and Starling Marte, and a more experienced Francisco Alvarez will be a huge addition. I think they'll be better than last year, which isn't saying much, but I can't see them being a serious threat, so I'll just put them in the fish tier with the Marlins. Up next is the Washington Nationals. Since winning the World Series in 2019, they have gone downhill, and 2023 brought another last place finish. But the end of last year provided hope to a less than enthusiastic fan base. That excitement was mainly seen in the performance of C.J. Abrams, the main piece of the Juan Soto trade, who had an offensive breakthrough midway through last year, hitting 11 home runs with an 809 OPS in July and August. They also have Joey Meneses and Keibert Ruiz, who will get plenty of opportunity to showcase themselves this year. The Nationals barely lost anything and gained a few experienced players such as the camp contact Joey Gallo, Nick Senzel, while Jesse Winker and Eddie Rosario received minor league contracts. The young and inconsistent Josiah Gray and Mackenzie Gore will lead the rotation, while Patrick Corbin, Jake Irvin, Trevor Williams, and Zach Davies fight for the rest of the rotation. The Nationals are a young team, clearly in the midst of a rebuild, though they appear to be taking massive steps forward. CJ Abrams and a few young players are the main pieces to watch for Nationals fans who are in the wins next year tier. Up next is the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies were a wildcard team again last year, and this came to their benefit when they beat the Braves again. But they blew a 3-2 lead with home field advantage in the NLCS against the Diamondbacks. The biggest move the Phillies made was re-signing Aaron Nola, who came back on a discount, and they extended their number 2 in Zach Wheeler for 3 years. They lost their postseason hero Craig Kimbrell, along with Michael Lorenzen and Rhys Hoskins, who missed all of 2023. And they didn't gain much outside of Whit Merrifield and Spencer Turnbull, and are returning much of the same team. Jose Alvarado will likely take over the closer role, while Bryce Harper becomes a full-time first baseman. Locking up Nolan Wheeler for years to come will be huge, and aside from that, Taijuan Walker having a better year would be big, and if Ranger Suarez performed like he has in the postseason, then he could emerge as one of the best third starters in the league. The Phillies are easily the second best team in the division, and how it's been the past 2 years, maybe it's best they don't win the division, but based on how they've done in the postseason, I had to put them in the World Series contender tier. And we move to the NL Central. We begin with the defending NL Central champions, the Milwaukee Brewers. It looks like 2023 was the last year of opportunity in the windows the Brewers had, and as is the case in previous years, they were carried by their defense that won the team Gold Glove, and their pitching that was led by Corbin Burnes and Freddie Peralta that gave them the best team ERA in the league last year. But their offense was one of the worst in the league, finishing bottom 3 in average and OPS. And their struggles were best seen in their refusal to drive in runners during the wildcard round, ending with a 2-game sweep to continue the tradition of every team that beats the Brewers making the World Series. The offseason for the Brewers began with their manager of the last 9 seasons, Craig Counsell, leaving for their division opponent, the Chicago Cubs, and he's being replaced by longtime assistant Pat Murphy. And without a doubt, the biggest loss came from the trade of their former Cy Young winner, Corbin Burnes, who's going to the Orioles. They re-signed Brandon Woodruff, but he will miss some time to start the year, along with one of the best closers in baseball in Devin Williams. They did add some depth to their pitching by re-signing Wade Miley and adding Joe Ross and Jacob Junis. And as far as the poor offense, their biggest addition was Rhys Hoskins, who missed all of 2023 with an injury. They also signed Gary Sanchez and hope for another solid year from William Contreras and Christian Yelich. They are projected to finish third at 80 and 82, and like the teams in the AL Central, they are lucky to play in this division. It's hard to see their offense being that much better, and losing Corbin Burnes, and with Woodruff and Williams missing some time, though the pitching will still be good, I can see a regression this year, and I'm putting them in the mid-tier. Up next is the St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals had a disastrous season in their first season since 2000 without Yadier Molina or Albert Pujols on the team, losing more than 90 games for the first time since 1990 and finishing under 500 for the first time since 2007. And to make sure that doesn't happen again, the front office signed multiple members of the 2013 All-Star team, bringing back Lance Lynn and adding Kyle Gibson, and their biggest move of the offseason, Sonny Gray. They also brought back Matt Carpenter and added Brandon Crawford, mainly because Tommy Edman will be missing some time this year. The Cardinals by far had the funniest offseason in the fact that they thought Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt's veteran leadership wasn't enough, so they just decided to sign everyone in the baseball retirement home waiting room. It's not like the additions were all bad, as their pitching is reliable, but as Sonny Gray will miss his opening day start, you have to wonder how much age will factor into possible injuries in the future. I think the key will be Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt having better years, after 2023 was the worst year of both of their Cardinal careers. Despite the jokes about old age, they still have young players like Jordan Walker, Nolan Gorman, and Mason Wynn to look forward to, and Wilson Contreras was a great bat, though he struggled behind the plate, stepping into a tough position in the footsteps of Yadier Molina. The Cardinals are favored to win the division at 83 and 79, which says a lot, but I'm going to create a special tier for them called What Go 162-0 in 2014. Up next, we move to the Chicago Cubs. The Cubs are coming off a pretty good year that surprised many after they finished below 500 in 2021 and 2022. They decided not to sell at the trade deadline and ended up finishing one game out of a playoff spot, a spot they easily could have had if not for a September collapse that saw them lose 6 out of 7 to the team that took the spot for them in the Diamondbacks. The Cubs had a very interesting start to the offseason by signing Brewers manager Craig Counsell in a pretty surprising move, and besides this, they didn't do very much. They signed Shota Imanaga from Japan and signed Astros reliever Hector Neris, and their biggest move was re-signing Cody Bellinger to a 3-year, $80 million contract. And in 2023, his resurgence was huge for the team, and it will be interesting to see if this was just a one-off thing, or he is back to his MVP days. The Cubs are returning a very similar team, with the core of Happ, Horner, Suzuki, Bellinger, and Swanson. Justin Steele having another Cy Young candidacy would be massive, with Imanaga at least appearing to be a good number 2, while the rest of the rotation is a little shaky, but at least sort of reliable. They are projected to finish 1 game behind the Cardinals and benefit from being in that division and expanded playoffs, so I'll put them as a playoff contender. Up next, we move to the Pittsburgh Pirates. If there's any indication that the MLB season is a very long one, then remember that the Pirates were one of the best teams in baseball at the end of April, going 20-9. But then O'Neal Cruz got hurt, and it all came crashing down. They had good contributions from Jack Sawinski, Brian Reynolds, and Ke'Bryan Hayes, but not much outside of that. And the same is true in their pitching. Outside of their young ace Mitch Keller and their all-star closer David Bednar, there wasn't much, as they had 10 different starters and finished in the bottom 5 of team ERA in the NL. And they had a pretty good offseason by their standards. Their biggest move was extending Mitch Keller for 5 years and $77 million, but besides that, they signed veterans like Yasmani Grandal, Aroldis Chapman, Josh Fleming, Martin Perez, and Andrew McCutchen, at least showing signs that the front office is trying. Just based on spring training, O'Neal Cruz could be an MVP candidate, and Pirates fans have to be very excited about what they've seen from Paul Skeens, who will probably be up this year. I think the Pirates could be the biggest surprise team this year, but either way, they look to have a bright future ahead. I'm putting them in the wins next year tier, only because I think they emerge as a real contender next year and beyond that. And we finish in the NL Central with the Cincinnati Reds. For the first time in a while, Reds fans had real reason to be excited last year when they woke up on August 1st in first place. But the dog days of summer got to them, and they finished the rest of the season under 500, and missed the playoffs by a few games. But Reds fans still had to like what they saw, especially from their young guys like Matt McClain, Spencer Steer, Hunter Green, and of course, Elly De La Cruz, all under 26 years old with room to grow. The Reds did make a few moves this offseason, such as signing Jaime Candelario to a 3-year contract, and they also signed Frankie Montes and Nick Martinez, who they hope to move to the rotation. And an improvement in pitching will be the key, as they finished in the bottom 3 of team ERA last year, though their bullpen showed good signs. And adding the fact that they had one of the worst defenses, then it makes sense that they struggled near the end. The Reds are projected to finish 4th in the division at 79 and 83, and I personally think they surpass these projections and compete for a wildcard spot, which will be a great step forward as they look for their first playoff series win since 1995. I'm putting them in the playoff contenders tier. And now we move to the final division in the NL West. And we begin with what looks to be the new most hated team in the Los Angeles Dodgers. In the future, we may look back at the 3rd inning of Game 3 of the NLDS as a turning point in baseball history, as watching Lance Lynn give up 4 home runs in 1 inning as the Diamondbacks swept them caused the Dodgers front offices to go demon mode. The Dodgers had 2 of the 3 MVP candidates last year, and now they added the AL MVP in Shohei Ohtani, and they got him at a great price as they are only paying him $2 million this year, and the rest will be dealt with for the next ownership. They also added Yamamoto, James Paxton, and traded Ryan Pepio and Johnny DeLuca for Tyler Glasnow to help with the clear weak spot, which was their starting pitching. They also added Teoscar Hernandez because their lineup wasn't already good enough. The Dodgers are obviously the most talented team in the league, even though the Braves are projected to win more. When you spend that much, it's absolutely World Series or bust. And as long as Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman combine for more than 3 hits in a playoff series, they should at least lose in 4 games to the Rockies in the NLDS. And we move to the defending NL champions in the Arizona Diamondbacks. They came out of absolutely nowhere to surprise everyone on their way to their second pennant, and they were led by the unanimous Rookie of the Year, Corbin Carroll, and a lineup that was top-heavy with Ketel Marte and Christian Walker. And more than that, they were a fast team that stole 166 bases last year, 2nd in the MLB. They also had Zach Gallen as their ace, and Merrill Kelly, who proved to be a great big-game pitcher. I feel the Diamondbacks had a very underrated offseason, and their best move was signing Eduardo Rodriguez. Having him last year would have been huge, and is best seen in the fact that the Diamondbacks had a bullpen game in Game 4 of the World Series. They also traded for Eugenio Suarez and added Jock Peterson to add depth and experience to a young lineup. It has to be very disappointing to Diamondbacks fans to see what the Dodgers did in the offseason. It looked like this could be the year the Diamondbacks topped the NL West, but now it looks like they have no chance. But if they were to make the playoffs, the Diamondbacks would be the last wildcard team you'd want to play, especially after the experience they got last year, and if Brandon Pfaadt emerges as a big part of the rotation. Just based on that, I'm putting them as a World Series contender. Up next, we move to the San Francisco Giants. After their insane out-of-nowhere 107-win season in 2021, the Giants have gone straight down. The Giants have lacked serious depth and impact players, and it hurts even more with how close they have been to landing superstars, such as Carlos Correa and Arson Judge, who they had for 3 seconds. But just recently, they were able to sign two-time Cy Young winner Blake Snell at a bargain price for what he had been asking for. And aside from that, they weren't completely quiet as they added Jung Ho Lee from Japan and signed Jorge Soler, who both could help an abysmal 2023 offense that finished last in the league in OPS as Michael Conforto and Mitch Haniger could not regain themselves. And they ended up trading Mitch Haniger back to the Mariners, along with Anthony DeSclafani for Robbie Ray. He would come back mid-season and will look to help a stronger rotation that was very lacking outside of Logan Webb, as Jordan Hicks will also be given a chance as a starter. The Giants are now projected to win 83 games with Blake Snell, and they look to be better than last year. And now, I think the NL West is by far the best division in the NL, and will have 4 teams competing for a playoff spot, which puts them as playoff contenders. And we move to the San Diego Padres. The Padres had championship aspirations in 2023 after the huge offseason that saw the team add Xander Bogaerts to a lineup that featured Fernando Tatis Jr., Juan Soto, and Manny Machado, and a rotation that featured the eventual Cy Young winner and Josh Hader in the bullpen. It's not like they were terrible or had a massive implosion, they just couldn't get the job done and just missed out on the playoffs as their huge bet did not pay off. And as a result of their lack of finance, they traded Juan Soto and Trent Grisham to the Yankees for a number of players, including Michael King. They also lost Seth Lugo, Josh Hader, and Blake Snell, but they swept in and traded for Dylan Cease, with Drew Thorpe, who was a part of the Soto trade, heading to the White Sox. And they go into this year with a new manager, as Mike Shildt will take the place of Bob Melvin. It seems that the Padres are a team in transition, but they still have a lot of great talent, with uncertainties on their positions. A rotation of Joe Musgrove, Yu Darvish, Dylan Cease, and Michael King should still be a very good one, but again, they are in a very tough division. The amount of talent makes me believe they can still compete, and I'll put them as a playoff contender. And we move to the final team in the NL West in the National League, in the Colorado Rockies. The Rockies just had the worst season in their franchise's history, which is saying a lot considering the struggles the team has had. There were a few bright spots in 2023, such as Nolan Jones' great rookie year, and Bretton Doyle winning the Gold Glove. But aside from that, the very loyal Rockies fans didn't see much brightness, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any brighter. They had a quiet offseason as expected, signing Dakota Hudson and Jacob Stallings, and trading for Cal Quantrill. They can only hope Chris Bryant at least kind of shows he's worth it, and hopefully this year will showcase the young talent they've been missing. The only hope Rockies fans and everyone else has is the pattern. The Padres beat the Dodgers in the NLDS in 22, then the Diamondbacks did in 23. Could the Rockies do the funniest thing ever and come out of nowhere to beat the Dodgers?
Probably not.
I'm putting them in the wins next year tier, though when we combine the AL and NL tiers, they actually join the A's under the 50 feet of crap tier. And these are the tiers for both leagues. Plenty of contenders, pretenders, and front office defenders. This should be an interesting year, though it is top heavy, especially in the National League. As the new playoff format has shown, anything can happen. And maybe the Braves and Dodgers will enjoy watching the Pirates and Rockies in the NLCS from Cancun, while the A's await the winner in the World Series.